Airport security surrounded her like she was dangerous. 16-year-old Amara Mitchell stood in the aisle of Flight 447, her wrists locked in handcuffs, her face wet with tears she couldn't wipe away. Passengers craned their necks to get a better view, phones raised high, recording every second of her humiliation. Flash after flash lit up her trembling figure as people captured what they assumed was a criminal being caught. Behind her, a flight attendant stood with her arms crossed, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Sharon Bennett looked like justice had been served, like she'd done something heroic. At the front of the plane, a woman's voice cut through the chaos, raw and desperate. "She didn't take anything. Get your hands off my daughter." But security wasn't listening. They were already escorting Amara down the aisle, past rows of staring faces, past whispers and judgments, past assumptions written across every expression she saw. What Sharon didn't know in that moment, what she couldn't possibly have imagined as she watched that teenage girl being led away in handcuffs, was that this decision would change her life forever. But not in the way you think. Not in the way anyone could have predicted. Because sometimes, when you humiliate the wrong person, when you let your biases guide your actions, karma doesn't just knock on your door. It breaks it down. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how we got here, to understand how a routine flight from Boston to Atlanta turned into a viral nightmare that would cost careers, spark lawsuits, and expose ugly truths, we need to go back. Back to 6 hours earlier, before the accusations, before the handcuffs, before everything fell apart. 6 hours before her world exploded, Amara Mitchell stood in front of her bathroom mirror in her dorm room at Ashford Academy, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. At 16, she was used to being nervous. Nervous about tests, nervous about fitting in at a school where most kids had trust funds bigger than her mother's annual salary, nervous about proving she deserved the full scholarship that had changed her family's trajectory. But today's nervousness was different. Today, she was flying alone for the first time. First class, no less, though that was purely accidental. The flight had been overbooked, and when the gate agent asked if anyone was willing to take a later flight, Amara had been about to volunteer. Then the agent looked at her boarding pass and said, "Actually, miss, we're moving you to first class. Complimentary upgrade." Amara had nodded, tried to act like this was normal, like she flew first class all the time. But inside? She was terrified. She checked her carry-on for the third time. Homework, because even on a weekend trip, AP classes didn't pause. A change of clothes. Her laptop, old and slow but functional. And wrapped carefully in a soft cloth, the violin her grandmother had given her when she was 7. The wood was worn, the case battered, but it was her most precious possession. Her grandmother had saved for months to buy it, determined that Amara would have opportunities she never had. And that's exactly why this trip mattered so much. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her mother as a single parent, who had worked as a house cleaner for 40 years, who had taught Amara that education was the one thing nobody could ever take away from you, was turning 80. And Amara was going to surprise her. Her mother, Amara Mitchell, didn't even know Amara had planned this. Amara worked 2 jobs as a nurse, pulling double shifts to help cover what the scholarship didn't, and she'd flown down to Atlanta the day before for the party. She thought Amara was staying at school to study. When Amara walked through that door and played Happy Birthday on her grandmother's old violin, it was going to be perfect. Amara grabbed her bag and headed to the airport, her heart full of anticipation. She was intelligent beyond her years, her teachers said so constantly. Mature, responsible, the kind of student who turned in work early and stayed after class to discuss philosophy. She was everything a scholarship kid needed to be. Polite to everyone, grateful for every opportunity, careful never to make waves. What she didn't know was that no amount of politeness would matter in a few hours. That her scholarships, her grades, her carefully maintained reputation, none of it would shield her from what was coming. While Amara was packing her bag with excitement, 42-year-old Sharon Bennett was having the kind of morning that made her question every choice she'd ever made. Her alarm hadn't gone off. Actually, that wasn't true. She'd thrown her phone across the room when it went off, and then fallen back asleep. Now she was running 20 minutes late, and her supervisor had made it crystal clear that late wasn't an option anymore. Sharon had been a flight attendant for 20 years. 20 years of forced smiles, of serving drinks at 30,000 feet, of dealing with entitled passengers who treated her like she was invisible. She'd started this job excited, thinking she'd see the world. Instead, she saw the inside of the same aircraft cabin over and over, while younger, prettier attendants got promoted past her. 3 months ago, she'd been passed over for the purser position she'd applied for. They gave it to a 28-year-old named Brittany who'd been with the airline for 5 years. 5 years. Sharon had been doing this job before Brittany could legally drink, and somehow that wasn't enough. Her phone rang as she was rushing to get dressed. Her ex-husband. She almost didn't answer, but avoiding him only made things worse. "Sharon, we need to talk about the payment." "I sent what I could, Derek." "What you could isn't what the agreement says. I've got bills too." "You think I don't? You think living alone is cheap? You wanted the divorce, remember?" The argument spiraled from there, the same fight they'd had 100 times since the papers were finalized. When she finally hung up, she had 15 minutes to get to the airport for her shift. She made it with 4 minutes to spare, rushing through employee security, still buttoning her uniform. Her supervisor, James, was waiting. "Sharon. My office." "Now." She followed him, dread pooling in her stomach. James closed the door and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Sharon, I'm going to be direct. You've received 3 passenger complaints in the last month. 3. That's more than the rest of the crew combined." "Passengers complain about everything now," Sharon started, but James held up his hand. "These aren't complaints about peanuts or legroom. These are complaints about your attitude. About how you treat people. One passenger said you were, and I quote, dismissive and borderline hostile." Sharon felt her jaw tighten. "I do my job. I'm not questioning your technical abilities. I'm questioning your customer service. And I'm telling you right now, one more complaint, just one, and we'll have to reassign you. Possibly to ground duties." He let that sink in. Ground duties meant no flight pay, no tips, basically a massive pay cut she absolutely could not afford. "I need you to dig deep today, Sharon. Find that service mentality you had when you started. Can you do that?" She nodded, forcing her face into something that might pass for agreement. "Yes, sir." But as she left his office and headed to Gate B-17 for Flight 447 to Atlanta, resentment burned in her chest. 20 years of service, and this is the thanks she got? Lectures about attitude? Meanwhile, kids like Brittany and that new flight attendant Jessica practically got promoted for showing up with a smile. Sharon's morning had been a disaster. Her life felt like it was crumbling. And when people are stressed, when they're angry at the world, they look for someone to take it out on. Someone they have power over. Someone who won't fight back. She had no idea that today, she'd choose exactly the wrong person. The boarding process began at 11:30. Sharon stood at the entrance to the aircraft, her smile fixed in place, greeting passengers with the same scripted warmth she'd perfected over 2 decades. "Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard. Enjoy your flight." Most passengers got a genuine smile, especially the first-class passengers. They were the ones who could make or break your day with their tips and comments to management. Sharon knew how to read people, how to figure out who mattered and who didn't within seconds of seeing them. That's when Amara walked down the jetway. Sharon noticed her immediately, and something in her expression shifted. The girl was young, maybe 15 or 16, wearing jeans and a hoodie from some school, carrying a backpack that had seen better days and a violin case that looked like it might fall apart. She had her boarding pass clutched in her hand, her eyes wide as she stepped onto the plane. And she turned left, toward first class. Sharon's smile tightened. "Excuse me, sweetie?" She made her voice sugary sweet, the tone you use when you're about to correct someone. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" Amara stopped, confused. "I'm sorry. The main cabin is toward the back, honey. This is first class." Amara held out her boarding pass, her voice quiet but steady. "I have seat 2A. They upgraded me at the gate." Sharon took the boarding pass, examined it like she was looking for evidence of forgery. Sure enough, it said 2A. But Sharon had seen this before, hadn't she? Kids with fake boarding passes, people trying to sneak into first class. Though even as she thought it, part of her knew that wasn't what was happening here. The boarding pass was legitimate. Upgrades happened all the time. But Sharon's day had been terrible. Her life was falling apart. And sometimes, when people are looking for someone to blame, when they need to feel like they have control over something, they find it in the smallest acts of power. "All right," Sharon said slowly, handing back the boarding pass. "Seat 2A is right there." But her eyes followed Amara as the girl moved down the aisle. Skeptical. Suspicious. Watchful. Amara found her seat and carefully placed her violin case in the overhead bin. She was trembling slightly, not from cold but from the interaction. She'd dealt with this before, that look, that tone. The assumption that she didn't belong. At school, in stores, even sometimes on the street. She'd been taught by her mother to stay calm, to be twice as polite, twice as perfect, because that's what it took. She settled into seat 2A, and for a moment, let herself enjoy it. The seat was huge compared to economy. Leather, comfortable with actual legroom. She'd never experienced anything like this. She pulled out her homework, determined to use the flight time productively. First time in first class? Amara looked up. The woman in seat 2B was elderly, with kind eyes and a warm smile. She was Asian, maybe in her 70s, dressed elegantly but comfortably. "Is it that obvious?" Amara asked, embarrassed. "Only to someone who remembers their first time," the woman said. "I'm Mrs. Chen. Helen Chen. Amara Mitchell. Nice to meet you." "Where are you headed, Amara?" "Atlanta. It's my grandmother's 80th birthday." "How wonderful. She must be so proud of you." They chatted easily, and Amara felt her nervousness easing. Mrs. Chen was a retired teacher, she learned, flying to visit her son. She didn't ask why Amara was in first class, didn't question her presence. She just treated her like any other passenger, like she belonged. If only everyone on this flight had her perspective. A businessman in seat 3C, a white man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit, boarded and immediately pulled out his laptop. He barely glanced at anyone, already absorbed in work. Robert Caldwell, successful attorney, too focused on his case files to notice the drama brewing around him. And then there was Jessica, the younger flight attendant Sharon resented so much. Jessica was 26, enthusiastic about her job, and immediately noticed the way Sharon was hovering near Amara's seat. The way Sharon kept glancing over, like she was waiting for something to go wrong. Jessica had seen this before from Sharon. The subtle discrimination, the microaggressions towards certain passengers. She'd reported it once to James, but nothing had really changed. And now, watching Sharon circle near row 2 like a predator waiting for its moment, Jessica felt uncomfortable. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to become a key witness to something that would dominate news cycles, spark corporate investigations, and force an entire airline to reckon with its culture. Sharon finished the safety demonstration, her eyes flickering to Amara more than once. The girl was reading a textbook, completely absorbed, bothering no one. But Sharon couldn't shake the feeling, the suspicion that something was off. It wasn't rational. It wasn't fair. It was bias, pure and simple, dressed up as instinct. The plane's engines roared to life. The cabin lights dimmed. And as Flight 447 began its taxi toward the runway, Sharon Bennett made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her career. She was going to keep a very close eye on the girl in seat 2A. Because if there's one thing 20 years in this job had taught her, she told herself, it was how to spot trouble. And that girl? She just had a feeling about her. That feeling, that bias masquerading as intuition, was about to destroy everything Sharon had left. But before we get to that, before the accusations and the handcuffs and the viral videos, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been judged before you even opened your mouth? Have you ever walked into a space and immediately felt like you didn't belong, not because of anything you did, but because of who you are? Drop your story in the comments below. Because what's about to happen to Amara happens every single day, in planes and stores and schools across the world. And it's time we talked about it. Oh, and if you want to see how this story ends, if you want to know exactly how Sharon's life falls apart and what Amara does about it, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next is going to shock you. The plane lifted off the runway, climbing into clear blue skies. In seat 2A, Amara looked out the window, excited about seeing her grandmother. In the galley, Sharon prepared drink carts, her suspicions growing for no reason she could articulate. And somewhere between Boston and Atlanta, at 35,000 feet, everything was about to go catastrophically wrong. The plane had been in the air for maybe 15 minutes when she arrived. Patricia Whitmore. You could hear her before you could see her, her voice carrying from the jetway into the cabin like an announcement of royalty. Late boarding, of course, because people like Patricia Whitmore didn't operate on anyone's schedule but their own. She swept onto the plane dripping in wealth. Diamond earrings that caught the cabin lights and threw sparkles across the ceiling. A tennis bracelet on her left wrist that probably cost more than most people's cars. Rings on multiple fingers, each one a statement of status. Her designer handbag, the kind with logos so prominent they might as well be billboards, hung from her arm. Her coat, cashmere and clearly custom, was draped over her shoulders like a cape. Sharon's entire demeanor transformed. The suspicious, cold flight attendant who'd questioned Amara's right to be in first class became warm and accommodating in an instant. Mrs. Whitmore. So glad you made it. Let me help you with that. Patricia waved her hand dismissively at the overhead bins. There's no room up there. Someone's taken up all the space with their oversized bags. She said it loud enough for half the cabin to hear, her tone dripping with accusation. Let me rearrange things for you, Sharon said quickly, already reaching for other passengers' belongings. She moved bags around, squeezed and shifted, created space where apparently none had existed moments before. There we go. Perfect fit. Patricia settled into seat 3A, directly across the aisle from Amara, and made a production of arranging her belongings. The designer purse went under the seat in front of her, carefully positioned. The expensive coat got hung with exaggerated care. She pulled out her phone, checked her reflection in a compact mirror, applied lipstick that probably cost more than Amara's entire outfit. The plane pushed back from the gate. The safety demonstration played on screens throughout the cabin. And as they taxied toward the runway, Amara realized she was thirsty. The nervousness of flying, the excitement of the trip, it had all left her mouth dry. She waited until they were in the air and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Then she pressed the call button, and within seconds, Sharon appeared. But the warmth she'd shown Patricia Whitmore was nowhere in evidence now. Yes. Sharon's voice was clipped, impatient. Could I please have some water? Amara asked politely. We'll be doing the beverage service in about 20 minutes. I understand, but I'm really thirsty now. Just water would be fine. Sharon sighed like Amara had asked her to perform surgery. I'll see what I can do. She walked away without another word, and when she returned 5 minutes later, she practically dropped the plastic cup on Amara's tray table. Water sloshed over the side. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman in 2B, had been watching the entire exchange. She leaned over slightly and whispered to Amara, her voice kind but knowing. Don't let her bother you, dear. Some people carry their own storms, and they rain on everyone around them. That's not about you. That's about her. Amara managed a small smile and nodded. She pulled out her AP Literature textbook and tried to focus on the chapter about thematic analysis in Morrison's Beloved. But the words kept blurring. She could feel Sharon's eyes on her periodically, that surveillance disguised as attentiveness. It made her skin prickle with discomfort. Across the aisle, Patricia Whitmore scrolled through her phone, occasionally sighing dramatically about poor signal strength. Behind them, Robert Caldwell remained absorbed in his laptop, completely disconnected from everything happening around him. And at the back of first class, Jessica, the younger flight attendant, watched Sharon with growing concern. She'd seen this pattern before, the way Sharon treated certain passengers differently, and it made her deeply uncomfortable. But discomfort doesn't always translate to action. And Jessica's silence, her decision not to intervene yet, would become something she'd regret for a long time. The flight continued smoothly for another 20 minutes. Beverage service began. Sharon was all smiles for the business travelers and wealthy passengers, offering them premium drinks and extra snacks. When she got to Amara, her tone was perfunctory. Drink. Orange juice, please. Sharon handed it over without a word and moved on. Amara tried to shake off the treatment, tried to focus on her homework. She had an essay due Monday on the symbolism of flight in African American literature. The irony of working on that particular assignment while experiencing discrimination at 35,000 feet wasn't lost on her. That's when Patricia Whitmore unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "Excuse me," she said to no one in particular, stepping into the aisle and heading toward the bathroom at the front of the cabin. Amara barely looked up from her textbook. She was highlighting a passage about freedom and constraint when she heard it. The gasp. Then the voice, rising in panic. "My bracelet! My diamond bracelet is missing." Patricia Whitmore stood in the aisle, her hands in her purse, her face a mixture of shock and fury. Other passengers looked up, conversations stopping mid-sentence. The cabin got quiet in that way that happens when something has clearly gone wrong. Sharon appeared immediately. "Mrs. Whitmore, what's happened?" "My bracelet. My diamond bracelet was in my purse, right in the side pocket where I always keep it. It's gone." Patricia's voice was climbing in volume, in urgency. "It was right there when I boarded. A $25,000 diamond tennis bracelet, and it's vanished. $25,000. The number hung in the air like an accusation all its own. Sharon's response was immediate and telling. Her eyes swept the cabin and landed directly on Amara. Not on the businessman who'd been walking to the bathroom earlier. Not on the couple in row 4 who'd been moving around. On Amara, the girl she'd been suspicious of from the moment she boarded. "Mrs. Whitmore, please, let's stay calm," Sharon said, but her body language was already shifting. She was looking at Amara the way a security guard looks at someone they've already decided is guilty. Did anyone leave their seat while Mrs. Whitmore was in the lavatory? Jessica, standing near the galley, spoke up. "Several people have been up and down the aisle, Sharon. I wasn't tracking specific movements." Sharon cut her off with a sharp look. "I'm asking if anyone noticed anything unusual." She moved toward Amara's row, and Amara felt her stomach drop. She looked up from her textbook, confused about why the flight attendant was approaching her with that expression. "Sweetheart," Sharon said, her voice taking on that false sweetness again. "Did you happen to see anything? Anyone near Mrs. Whitmore's seat while she was away?" Amara blinked, genuinely confused. "No, I've been reading. I haven't looked up from my book." Sharon's eyes narrowed. She looked at Amara's worn backpack tucked under the seat, then at her second-hand textbook, then at Patricia Whitmore's designer everything. The contrast was stark, and Sharon was doing math in her head, making calculations based on assumptions and biases rather than evidence. Patricia was spiraling now, her voice getting louder. "Someone took it. It was just here. I put it in my purse specifically so it would be safe, and someone went through my belongings." Other passengers were starting to murmur. Some looked concerned. Others looked uncomfortable, like they wanted to disappear into their seats. A few had their phones out, not overtly recording yet, but ready. Sharon made a decision. The wrong decision. The decision that would change multiple lives in the next 20 minutes. "Everyone, please remain calm," she announced, her voice carrying through the cabin. "We need to conduct a routine check to locate Mrs. Whitmore's missing property. This is just a precaution, and I'm sure we'll resolve this quickly." But routine checks don't usually start with the flight attendant walking directly to one specific passenger. Routine checks don't usually begin with suspicion already aimed like a weapon. And as Sharon stopped next to Amara's seat, everyone in first class knew exactly who she suspected. Amara looked up, her textbook still open in her lap, her orange juice half finished on the tray table. "I'm sorry, is something wrong?" "I need to check your area," Sharon said. "Just a formality." "Check my area for what?" "For Mrs. Whitmore's bracelet." The words hit Amara like a physical blow. "You think I took it?" "I didn't say that. I said I need to check your area. If you have nothing to hide, this won't take long." Amara felt her face getting hot, felt the stares of every passenger in first class burning into her skin. "I don't understand. I didn't take anything. I haven't even gotten up from my seat except to use the bathroom before we took off." Sharon's expression hardened. "Then you won't mind if we look, will you?" It wasn't really a question. It was a demand wrapped in false politeness. And Amara, who'd been taught her whole life to comply with authority, to not make waves, to be twice as good and half as confrontational, felt trapped. "Okay," she said quietly. Sharon reached for Amara's backpack, pulling it out from under the seat with more force than necessary. She unzipped it and started pulling things out. Textbooks, worn and highlighted. A folder full of scholarship information and acceptance letters from Ashford Academy. A pencil case with pens that were mostly down to nubs. A water bottle. Crumpled granola bar wrappers. She pulled out each item and examined it like evidence, holding things up for Patricia Whitmore to see. "Is this your bracelet?" She'd ask sarcastically about a textbook, about a folder, making a show of the search. Then Sharon found Amara's wallet. She opened it without asking permission, and Amara felt violation wash over her in waves. Her private things, her identification, her few dollars, all exposed. "Only $40? Sharon said loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "How exactly did you afford a first-class ticket?" Amara's voice shook. "It was an upgrade. I showed you my boarding pass when I boarded. I explained this already." "An upgrade. Very convenient." Mrs. Chun couldn't stay silent anymore. "This is ridiculous. That girl hasn't moved from her seat. I've been sitting right next to her the entire flight." Sharon barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, please. I'm conducting a safety and security check." "This isn't a security check, this is harassment. She's a child." But Sharon wasn't listening. She was going through every pocket of Amara's backpack now, finding nothing but homework and the normal contents of a teenage student's bag. No bracelet. No jewelry. No evidence of anything except a hard-working student trying to get to her grandmother's birthday party. Other passengers were watching now with varying expressions. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, clearly wanting to speak up but staying silent. Others looked satisfied, like this confirmed something they'd already decided. A man in row 5 was definitely recording on his phone now, holding it low but pointed directly at the scene. Robert Caldwell, the businessman, finally looked up from his laptop. He watched for a moment, his expression unreadable, then seemed to make a decision. He went back to his work, disconnecting once again. That decision, that choice to remain uninvolved, would haunt him later. Sharon finished searching the backpack and found nothing. But instead of apologizing, instead of moving on to check other areas where the bracelet might have fallen, she doubled down. Patricia Whitmore, watching from across the aisle, wasn't satisfied. Check her pockets. Check her person. A bracelet that size could easily be hidden. Amara's eyes went wide. "What? You can't." Sharon's voice went cold. "I'm going to have to ask you to come to the galley with me." "But I didn't do anything." "We need to conduct a more thorough check, and I'd prefer to do it privately rather than here in front of everyone." Tears were forming in Amara's eyes now, her voice cracking. "I didn't take anything. I've been sitting here reading. Ask Mrs. Chin. Ask anyone." Mrs. Chin was half out of her seat now. "She's telling the truth. I've been right here the entire time. This is absolutely unacceptable." But Sharon had made up her mind. She'd started this publicly, and backing down now would mean admitting she was wrong. Would mean accepting that her suspicions were based on nothing but bias. And Sharon Bennett, stressed and resentful and looking for control in a life that felt chaotic, wasn't ready to admit that. She reached for Amara's arm. "Come with me. Now." Amara pulled back instinctively. "Don't touch me. I know my rights. You can't just accuse me and search me because you think." The words died in her throat because she knew what Sharon thought. Everyone on this plane knew what Sharon thought. It was written in every suspicious glance from the moment Amara had boarded. Sharon's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This teenage girl was challenging her authority in front of a cabin full of passengers. In front of Patricia Whitmore, who was watching like this was entertainment. In front of the other crew members who Sharon already felt judged by. She turned toward the cockpit and picked up the internal phone. Her voice carried through the cabin. "Captain, we have a situation in first class. I need you to request that airport security meet us upon landing. We have a suspected theft in progress, and the suspect is refusing to cooperate." The words, suspected theft, and suspect, echoed through the cabin like bombs dropping. Amara felt the world tilt. Her breath caught in her chest. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. The captain's voice came over the intercom moments later, calm and professional and utterly devastating. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been advised of a security concern in the cabin. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Airport security will meet the aircraft upon landing to address the situation. We apologize for any inconvenience. Inconvenience? Like this was a delayed beverage service. Like Amara's life wasn't imploding at 35,000 feet. Amara was crying now, full tears streaming down her face. She pulled out her phone, desperate to call her mother, but there was no signal. Of course there was no signal. They were 7 miles in the air, and she was utterly alone. Around her, passengers were reacting in real time. The man in row 5 was definitely recording everything on his phone now, not even trying to hide it. A woman in row 6 was whispering to her husband, their expressions a mix of fascination and horror. 2 teenagers in row 7 had their phones out too, probably already trying to connect to the weak in-flight Wi-Fi to post about this. Mrs. Chen was standing now despite the seatbelt sign, her small frame radiating fury. This is discrimination. This is absolutely discrimination, and I will be reporting every single second of this to the airline. That girl has done nothing wrong. Jessica, the younger flight attendant, looked torn between supporting her colleague and speaking up against obvious injustice. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Sharon, maybe we should wait until we land and let security handle? I am handling it, Sharon snapped. This is my cabin, my responsibility. Return to your duties. Patricia Whitmore sat in her seat looking satisfied, like justice was being served. Like the right person was being accused. Like the value of her bracelet justified any amount of humiliation inflicted on a child. Amara tried to steady her breathing, tried to remember what her mother had taught her. Stay calm. Don't give them a reason to escalate. But how do you stay calm when you're being accused of a crime you didn't commit? When an entire cabin full of strangers is watching you be labeled a thief? When you know the security cameras are catching every moment of your humiliation? Sharon stood over Amara's seat like a guard, making sure she didn't move, didn't touch anything else. Making a spectacle of containment. Other passengers whispered and recorded and judged, and Amara felt smaller with each passing second. The pilot announced their descent into Atlanta would begin in 40 minutes. 40 minutes of sitting in this cabin under Sharon's surveillance. 40 minutes of being stared at and filmed and presumed guilty. 40 minutes until airport security would board this plane and treat her like a criminal in front of everyone. Amara thought about her grandmother, waiting at home for tomorrow's party, not knowing her granddaughter was sitting on a plane being accused of theft. She thought about her mother, who'd sacrificed everything to give Amara opportunities, whose heart would shatter when she found out what was happening. She thought about her scholarship, her reputation, her dreams of college and music and a future that suddenly felt impossibly far away. And through her tears, through her humiliation, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered something important. This isn't right. This isn't justice. And when you survive this, you make sure it never happens to anyone else. But first, she had to survive it. She had to endure the next 40 minutes of shame, the landing, the security officers, the questions and accusations and the assumption of guilt written across every face. Sharon stood watch, convinced she'd done the right thing. Patricia Whitmore checked her phone, periodically lamenting her missing bracelet. Mrs. Chen sat rigid with anger, already composing the complaint she'd file. Robert Caldwell returned to his laptop, choosing comfort over courage. Jessica prepared the cabin for landing, guilt gnawing at her conscience. And somewhere in the cargo hold below, in seat cushion 3A where Patricia Whitmore had sat and shifted and nervously fidgeted before takeoff, a diamond bracelet sat wedged between cushions, completely invisible, waiting to be found by the cleaning crew and turn this entire nightmare into something even worse. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do? Have you ever had to sit there while people assume the worst about you based on nothing but their own biases? Drop your story in the comments, because what's happening to Amara right now is happening to people every single day, in airports and stores and schools and streets. And we need to talk about it. And if you want to see what happens when airport security boards this plane, when Amara's mother finds out what's been done to her daughter, when the truth finally comes out and Sharon realizes the magnitude of her mistake, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. Because the next 20 minutes of this story will absolutely blow your mind. Justice is coming. But not in the way anyone expects. The plane descended through clouds toward Atlanta. In seat 2A, Amara Mitchell sat with tears on her face and dignity in her spine, about to become the center of a viral moment that would change everything. The captain's voice came through the intercom again, steady and professional, completely unaware of the injustice unfolding in his first-class cabin. Flight attendants, we've assessed the situation and determined that continuing to Atlanta is the safest course of action. We'll maintain our current flight plan. Estimated landing time is 90 minutes. 90 minutes. An hour and a half. For most passengers, that's nothing. A movie. A nap. A few chapters of a book. But for Amara Mitchell, sitting in seat 2A with tears streaming down her face and the entire cabin watching her like she was a criminal, 90 minutes might as well have been 90 years. Sharon stood in the aisle, hands on her hips, her authority asserted and her decision made. And then she said the words that would cement this moment as one of the cruelest things Amara had ever experienced. I need you to come with me. You'll be sitting in the jump seat in the galley for the remainder of the flight. Amara looked up through her tears, confused. What? Why? For the comfort of the other passengers. Until we land and security can properly address this situation, I need you where I can supervise you. Mrs. Chen was on her feet immediately, her small frame vibrating with rage. The comfort of other passengers? What about her comfort? She's a child. You've humiliated her, accused her without evidence, and now you're isolating her like she's dangerous. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but I need you to sit down and fasten your seatbelt. This is a safety issue. Safety? The only person unsafe on this plane is that girl. Unsafe from your prejudice. Sharon's face flushed red. She wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not by an elderly woman half her size. If you don't return to your seat immediately, I'll have to report your behavior as well. Mrs. Chen looked like she wanted to say more, wanted to physically block Sharon from moving Amara, but the seatbelt sign was on and she was an elderly woman who'd been raised to respect authority even when authority was wrong. She sat down, but her eyes never left Amara, trying to communicate support across the aisle. Trying to let this terrified teenager know that someone believed her. Amara stood on shaking legs, her backpack already torn apart and searched, her dignity already shredded. Sharon led her to the galley at the front of the cabin, past rows of passengers who'd witnessed everything. Some looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Others stared openly, their phones tracking Amara's walk of shame. The galley was small, cramped, filled with beverage carts and the smell of coffee. Sharon pointed to the jump seat, a small fold-down chair that flight attendants use during takeoff and landing. Sit there. Don't move. Don't touch anything. Amara sat, and Sharon literally stood guard over her, arms crossed, like Amara might somehow sprout wings and fly away at 35,000 feet. Like a 16-year-old girl who weighed maybe 120 pounds was some kind of threat that required constant surveillance. The minutes crawled by like hours. Amara could hear the murmur of conversation from the cabin, could feel the weight of attention even though she couldn't see most of the passengers anymore. She tried to breathe slowly, tried not to completely break down, but every breath felt like it might turn into a sob. That's when Jessica appeared. The younger flight attendant, the one who'd been uncomfortable with Sharon's behavior from the beginning, the one who'd stayed silent when maybe she shouldn't have. She had a small package of tissues in her hand, and she glanced over her shoulder to make sure Sharon was momentarily distracted with another passenger before leaning close to Amara. Here, she whispered, pressing the tissues into Amara's hand. I'm so sorry. This isn't right. This whole thing isn't right. Amara took the tissues, her hands trembling. Thank you, she managed to whisper back. Jessica wanted to say more. You could see it in her eyes, the guilt and the recognition that she should have spoken up louder, should have done more than just whisper sympathy. But Sharon turned back, and Jessica quickly moved away, returning to her duties with that guilt settling heavy in her chest. 10 minutes later, Mrs. Chen appeared at the galley entrance. She'd unbuckled when the seatbelt sign briefly turned off, and she'd made her way forward with determination in every step. "That child is innocent," she said directly to Sharon, her voice low but fierce. "I have been sitting next to her the entire flight. She has not moved from her seat except when you forced her to. She has not touched anyone's belongings. You are making a terrible mistake, and you are going to regret this." Sharon's jaw tightened. She'd been questioned and challenged more in the last hour than she had in months, and she was doubling down hard now because admitting she was wrong felt impossible. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but I'm doing my job. I have a responsibility to all passengers on this aircraft, and when valuable property goes missing, I have to take action." Taking action would be searching the entire area, not targeting a child based on your assumptions. "Please return to your seat, or I will have to file a formal complaint about your interference with crew duties." Mrs. Chen stared at Sharon for a long moment, and in that stare was everything she couldn't say. Every instance of discrimination she'd witnessed or experienced in her 70-plus years. Every time authority had abused power and hidden behind procedure. Every moment when speaking up felt both necessary and futile. She turned to Amara, and her expression softened completely. "Stay strong, sweetheart. The truth always comes out. Always." Then she returned to her seat, but not before making eye contact with several other passengers, silently indicting every single person who was watching this injustice and doing nothing. Throughout the cabin, passengers were having their own reactions to the ongoing drama. In row 5, the man who'd started recording early had now captured at least 20 minutes of footage. He was already composing the caption in his head. "Flight attendant racially profiles teenage girl. You won't believe what happens next." He didn't particularly care about justice. He cared about views, about going viral, about being the person who broke the story. In row 6, a couple sat in uncomfortable silence. The wife kept whispering, "Should we say something? This doesn't feel right." The husband kept responding, "It's not our business. We don't know what really happened." They would both stay silent. They would both feel guilty about it later. But in the moment, comfort won over courage. A woman in row 7 had been filming too, but her hands were shaking. She was a mother herself, had a daughter around Amara's age, and watching this was making her physically ill. But she didn't speak up either. She told herself she was gathering evidence, that the recording would help later, but really she was just another witness who chose documentation over intervention. Robert Caldwell, the businessman in seat 3C, had been absorbed in his laptop for most of the flight. But now he was watching. Really watching. He'd looked up when the accusation first started, had observed Sharon's behavior, had seen the lack of evidence and the abundance of bias. As an attorney, he recognized injustice when he saw it. As a human being, he felt the discomfort of witnessing discrimination. But he said nothing. He made no move to help. He simply observed, troubled but passive, and returned his attention to his work. That passivity, that choice to prioritize his own comfort over a child's dignity, would become something he couldn't forget. Patricia Whitmore, the woman whose bracelet started this entire catastrophe, approached Sharon in the galley. She leaned in close, her voice low but audible enough for Amara to hear every word. "I want to press full charges when we land. That bracelet wasn't just valuable, it was my grandmother's. It has sentimental value. I want her prosecuted to the fullest extent." Full charges. Prosecution. The words hit Amara like physical blows. She'd gone from excited teenager surprising her grandmother to accused criminal facing prosecution, all in the span of an hour. All because she'd been upgraded to first class. All because a bracelet went missing and Sharon Bennett had looked at her and decided she looked like a thief. Amara broke down completely then. Not the quiet tears she'd been fighting. Full, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. She buried her face in the tissues Jessica had given her, but they were already soaked through. Her whole life was imploding. Her scholarship could be revoked. Her acceptance to colleges could be rescinded. Her mother, who'd worked so hard to give her opportunities, would be devastated. And her grandmother. Her sweet grandmother who'd saved every penny to buy a 7-year-old a violin, who'd always told her that education was the one thing nobody could take away. What would she think when she found out her granddaughter had been arrested? Through her tears, Amara remembered that moment. She must have been 7 years old, sitting in her grandmother's tiny living room. Her grandmother had placed the violin case in her hands, used but cherished, and knelt down to look her in the eyes. "Baby girl, I want you to have this. I want you to learn, to study, to become everything I never got the chance to be. Because you know what? People can take a lot from you in this life. They can take your money, your possessions, even your dignity if you let them. But education? Knowledge? What you put in your mind and your heart? Nobody can ever take that away. Nobody." Those words echoed in Amara's mind now as she sat in this galley, accused and humiliated. Her grandmother had been trying to prepare her for a world that would challenge her, judge her, try to diminish her. But nothing could have prepared her for this. The remaining hour of the flight was torture. Pure, uninterrupted psychological torture. Amara sat on that jump seat while Sharon watched her like a hawk. While passengers walked past to use the bathroom and stared at her with curiosity or judgment. While the plane cruised toward Atlanta and her fate. Jessica brought her a cup of water at one point, silently, guiltily. Mrs. Chun walked past twice more, each time giving Amara a look of solidarity and support. But mostly, Amara was alone with her thoughts and her terror and the growing certainty that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't control. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Flight attendants, prepare for landing." Amara's stomach dropped. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading for the last 90 minutes. The moment when abstract accusations became concrete consequences. The plane descended through the clouds, Atlanta's skyline coming into view through the small windows. The landing gear extended with a mechanical thunk. The ground rose up to meet them. And then they were down, wheels screeching against tarmac, the plane decelerating as they taxied toward the gate. Amara's heart was pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. Sharon unbuckled from her own jump seat and immediately moved to stand over Amara again, making sure she didn't move, didn't try to run. As if there was anywhere to run on an aircraft that was currently surrounded by airport ground crew. The plane pulled up to the gate, and through the windows, Amara could see them. Airport security. For officers in uniform standing on the jetway, waiting. Waiting for her. The seatbelt sign dinged off, but Sharon held up her hand to the cabin. "Please remain seated for a moment. We have security personnel who need to board first." The door opened, and the security officers entered. 4 of them, 3 men and 1 woman, all looking serious and official. Sharon immediately pointed at Amara. "That's her. The suspect. She's been under supervision since the incident." The suspect. Not the girl, or the passenger, or even Amara. The suspect. A label that stripped away her humanity and replaced it with guilt. The lead officer, a tall man with graying hair and a weathered face, approached the galley. "Young lady, I need you to stand up for me." Amara stood on legs that felt like they might give out. She was shaking visibly now, trembling from head to toe like she was freezing even though the cabin was warm. "What's your name?" "Amara Mitchell." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Amara, I'm Officer Davis. We've received a report of a theft on this aircraft. A diamond bracelet worth approximately $25,000. Do you know anything about that?" "No, sir. I didn't take anything. I've been sitting in my seat the whole flight." Officer Davis looked at Sharon. "Have you searched the area?" "I searched her belongings thoroughly. I didn't find the bracelet, but..." "But what?" Sharon hesitated. Because what was she going to say? But I'm sure she took it based on absolutely nothing but my assumptions. She was the closest passenger to where the bracelet went missing. Officer Davis looked around the first-class cabin. "This is first class. Everyone is close to everyone. Did you search other passengers' belongings?" "No, but..." "So you specifically searched this passenger's belongings based on what evidence?" Sharon's face flushed. In front of security, in front of other passengers, in the cold light of official questioning, her reasoning sounded exactly as flimsy as it was. The passenger who reported the missing bracelet indicated. I indicated that my bracelet was missing from my purse, Patricia Whitmore interjected, stepping forward. I didn't indicate who took it. But clearly, someone did, and I want this resolved. I want my property back, and I want whoever took it held accountable. Officer Davis turned to his team. We need to do a thorough search of the suspect's belongings and person, and then of the immediate area where the bracelet was last seen. Search of her person. The words made Amara feel sick. I didn't take anything, she said again, her voice breaking. Please. You can search my stuff, but I didn't do this. The officers began going through Amara's backpack again, methodically checking every pocket, every fold. They found exactly what Sharon had found. School supplies. Scholarship papers. Textbooks. A wallet with $40. Nothing that remotely resembled a diamond bracelet. All right, Officer Davis said. We're going to need to do a more thorough search. We can do this here in front of everyone, or we can escort you to a private security office. Which would you prefer? Amara opened her mouth to respond, but that's when her phone rang. It had regained signal as soon as they'd landed, and her mother's number flashed across the screen. With shaking hands, Amara answered, putting it on speaker because she could barely hold the phone steady. Baby? Where are you? I'm at the airport to pick you up. Your flight landed 20 minutes ago. And then Amara's voice, breaking completely. Mom, they're saying I stole something. There are police here. I didn't do anything, Mom, I swear I didn't. Her mother's voice changed instantly, from confused to absolutely fierce. What? Put whoever's in charge on the phone right now. Officer Davis took the phone. Ma'am, this is Officer Davis with airport security. Are you this young woman's parent? I am her mother, and I'm asking you what the hell is going on. There's been a report of theft on the aircraft. We're conducting a search. A search of my 16-year-old daughter? Do not touch my daughter without me present. Do you understand me? I am her parent, she is a minor, and you will not conduct any search of her person without me there. I'm in the terminal right now. Terminal South, correct? Yes, ma'am, but... No buts. You keep your hands off my child until I get there. I'm coming right now. The line went dead. Officer Davis looked at Amara, then at his team, then sighed. All right, we wait for the parent. But I need you to come with us off the aircraft. We'll wait in the security office. I didn't do anything, Amara sobbed. Please. My mom is meeting me here. Please, I just want to see my mom. And you will. But we need to follow procedure. Stand up and come with us, please. That's when one of the other officers pulled out handcuffs. The sight of them made several passengers gasp. Mrs. Chen stood up from her seat. She's a child. You're putting her in handcuffs. Ma'am, procedure requires. She hasn't run. She hasn't resisted. She's been sitting here crying and cooperative, and you're treating her like a violent criminal. But procedures are procedures, and Officer Davis nodded to his colleague. Hands behind your back, please. Amara couldn't move. Couldn't process what was happening. The officer moved behind her and gently took her wrists, and she felt the cold metal close around them. The sound of her freedom disappearing. Let's go. They walked her down the aisle of that airplane past every passenger in first class. Past the people who'd filmed her. Past the people who'd stayed silent. Past Mrs. Chin who had tears running down her face. Past Robert Caldwell who was finally looking troubled, like maybe he should have done something earlier. Past Patricia Whitmore who looked satisfied. Past Jessica who looked devastated with guilt. Sharon stood near the exit, and as Amara passed her, there was a moment where their eyes met. Amara's full of tears and betrayal. Sharon's full of something that might have been doubt creeping in at the edges, but still mostly convinced she'd done the right thing. They escorted Amara off the plane and into the jetway. And that's where the real nightmare began. Because the jetway led into the terminal, and the terminal was full of people. Travelers. Families. All of them turning to stare as a teenage black girl in handcuffs was escorted by 4 security officers. Phones came out immediately. Dozens of them. Flashes going off like paparazzi surrounding a celebrity, except this wasn't fame, this was public humiliation. People whispered and pointed. Parents pulled their children closer like Amara was dangerous. Someone shouted, "What did she do?" Someone else shouted back, "Probably theft." Probably theft. Based on nothing. Based on assumptions made in seconds by strangers who knew nothing about her life, her character, her achievements, her dreams. Amara tried to keep her head up, tried to maintain some dignity, but the tears wouldn't stop falling. The crowd kept growing, people drawn to drama like moths to a flame. And through it all, the phones kept recording, kept filming, kept capturing every second of her degradation. Somewhere in that crowd, videos were already being uploaded. Already going viral. Teenage girl arrested for theft at Atlanta airport. Flight attendant catches thief red-handed. The narrative was being written in real time, and Amara had no control over it. They led her through the terminal toward the security office, and with each step, she felt herself becoming smaller. Not physically, but spiritually. Like her personhood was being eroded by every stare, every whisper, every flash of a camera phone. And then, cutting through the crowd like a force of nature, a voice. Amara. Her mother. Amara Mitchell, still in her nurse's scrubs from the night shift she'd worked before flying to Atlanta, pushing through the crowd with the kind of determination that comes from a mother seeing her child in distress. Mom. Amara's voice broke on the word. Tamara reached them, and the look on her face when she saw her daughter in handcuffs would haunt everyone who witnessed it. Fury. Heartbreak. Protective rage all mixed together. Get those off her right now. She's 16 years old. What are you people doing? Officer Davis held up his hand. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but we need to. I'm not upset, I'm furious. My daughter is an honors student with a full scholarship. She's never been in trouble a day in her life. And you have her in handcuffs in the middle of an airport? The crowd around them had grown even larger, everyone watching the confrontation. And somewhere in that crowd, more phones recording. But this time, the narrative might be different. This time, people were seeing a mother defending her child. Seeing a teenager who looked terrified rather than threatening. Seeing the humanity that Sharon Bennett had failed to see from the moment Amara boarded that plane. What happens when a mother's love meets systemic injustice? What happens when viral videos tell a different story than the one authority once told? What happens when a diamond bracelet is found exactly where it always was, and everyone who participated in this humiliation has to face what they've done? Have you ever had to watch someone you love be treated like this? Have you ever seen injustice unfold and felt powerless to stop it? Tell me in the comments, because this story isn't over. Not by a long shot. And if you want to see what happens when that bracelet is found, when Sharon realizes the magnitude of her mistake, when Amara and her mother demand accountability, you better hit that subscribe button right now. Because justice is coming. And it's going to be devastating. In the middle of Atlanta's airport, surrounded by cameras and crowds, Amara Mitchell stood in handcuffs next to her mother, both of them about to learn that sometimes the truth doesn't set you free immediately. Sometimes you have to fight for it. Sometimes you have to survive the darkness before you reach the light. And sometimes, the person who accuses you falsely discovers that karma doesn't forget. It just waits for the perfect moment to strike. Amara Mitchell had been a nurse for 18 years. She'd worked double shifts, overnight shifts, holiday shifts. She'd held the hands of dying patients and celebrated with families welcoming new babies. She'd dealt with emergencies that would break most people, stayed calm through chaos that would send others running. But nothing, absolutely nothing in her professional life had prepared her for the sight of her daughter in handcuffs in the middle of Atlanta's airport terminal. She'd been waiting at baggage claim, excited to surprise Amara who thought she was coming alone. Tamara had taken an earlier flight specifically to be there when her daughter arrived, to see her face light up when she realized they'd both made it for Grandma's birthday. She'd been checking her phone, wondering why Amara's flight was taking so long. To deplane when she got that call. That desperate, terrified call from her baby girl saying there were police and accusations and handcuffs. Tamara had run. Still in her scrubs from the night shift she'd worked before catching her early morning flight, still exhausted from 12 hours on her feet, she'd run through that terminal like her life depended on it. Because in a way it did. Her daughter was her life. Everything she'd sacrificed, every extra shift she'd taken, every hour of sleep she'd lost, it was all for Amara. And now she was pushing through a crowd of gawking strangers, all holding up their phones like this was entertainment, and she could see her baby, her brilliant, talented, kind daughter who'd never so much as gotten a detention, standing with her hands cuffed behind her back, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by 4 security officers like she was dangerous. Amara! The crowd parted slightly, and Tamara shoved through the last few people separating her from her daughter. When she reached them, when she saw Amara's face up close, saw the tear tracks and the fear and the absolute devastation in her eyes, something inside Tamara cracked and reformed into pure protective fury. What is happening here? Her voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a blade. She is 16 years old. Why is my child in handcuffs? Officer Davis, who'd been dealing with confused and angry parents for 20 years, had never seen quite this level of controlled rage. This woman was shaking with it, but every word came out precise and clear. Ma'am, your daughter has been accused of theft on the aircraft. We're following protocol. Protocol? Protocol? Tamara's voice rose, and several people in the crowd actually stepped back. Your protocol is to handcuff a minor without her parent present? Your protocol is to parade a child through an airport in restraints in front of hundreds of people? What kind of protocol is that? A new voice entered the conversation. Ma'am, I'm Supervisor Williams. A woman in a different uniform, clearly higher ranking, had arrived on scene. I understand you're upset, but we need to address the situation calmly. I am calm. If I wasn't calm, everyone here would know it. Now someone better tell me exactly what my daughter is accused of, and they better have evidence to back it up. Officer Davis gestured toward the security office. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private. Private? You humiliated her in public. Tamara gestured to the crowd, to the phones still recording. You made a spectacle of her in front of all these people. So no, we're not going somewhere private. You're going to tell me right here, right now, what evidence you have that my daughter committed a crime. Supervisor Williams exchanged a glance with Officer Davis. A passenger on the flight reported a missing diamond bracelet worth $25,000. The flight attendant indicated that your daughter was near the location where. The flight attendant indicated? Tamara's voice dropped dangerously low. So you don't have evidence. You have an indication from a flight attendant. Did anyone see my daughter take this bracelet? No, ma'am, but... Did you find this bracelet in her possession? No, but we haven't completed the full search. Did you find any stolen property on her? In her bag? In her pockets? Anywhere? Officer Davis shifted uncomfortably. No, but the accusation was serious enough that you decided to handcuff a child based on an accusation with zero evidence? Tamara turned to Amara, her voice softening completely. Baby, look at me. Look at Mama. Amara raised her eyes, and Tamara felt her heart shatter all over again at the fear and hurt she saw there. Did you take anything from anyone on that plane? No, Mama. I swear I didn't. I was just sitting in my seat, reading, and then the lady said her bracelet was missing and the flight attendant started searching my stuff and her voice broke into sobs. Tamara turned back to the officers, and her voice could have cut steel. My daughter is a straight-A student with a 4.2 GPA. She has a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious boarding schools in Massachusetts. She has never, not once in her entire life, been in any kind of trouble. She was flying to Atlanta to surprise her grandmother for her 80th birthday. And you have treated her like a criminal based on nothing. Ma'am, we're just following the report we received. Then your report is wrong. And I want to see the security footage from that plane right now. I want to see every single second of what happened. I want to see the evidence you used to justify putting my baby in handcuffs. Supervisor Williams held up her hands. We can review the footage, but it will take some time too. Then we wait. Because my daughter isn't going anywhere, and neither am I, until someone explains to me how this happened. The crowd around them was massive now, at least 50 people watching the confrontation. And Tamara was suddenly very aware of all those phones, all those cameras. Part of her wanted to shield Amara from it, to protect her from being recorded in this vulnerable moment. But another part of her, the part that had lived through her own experiences with discrimination, with assumptions, with being treated as less than, knew that these cameras might be the only thing that would hold people accountable. "Everyone is recording this," Tamara said loudly enough for the whole crowd to hear. "Everyone is watching. And everyone is going to see exactly how a 16-year-old honor student with no criminal record gets treated in this airport. So please, officers, proceed with your protocol. Show everyone what justice looks like." Officer Davis looked distinctly uncomfortable now. The situation had escalated beyond a simple theft accusation. This was becoming a public relations nightmare, and he could feel it. "Ma'am, why don't we at least remove the restraints while we wait?" "Now you want to remove the restraints? Where was that consideration 10 minutes ago when you were parading her through the terminal?" Before anyone could respond, Officer Davis's radio crackled to life. A voice came through, urgent and slightly breathless. "Supervisor Williams? You need to come back to the gate. There's been a development." Williams grabbed her own radio. "What kind of development?" "The missing item has been located." "Repeat, the missing item has been located." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Tamara's eyes went wide. Amara stopped crying mid-sob. Officer Davis looked from his radio to Amara to Supervisor Williams. "Where was it found?" Williams asked into the radio. "On the aircraft. In the seat cushions. Owner's seat." Back on Flight 447, still parked at the gate, the cleaning crew had boarded to prepare the plane for its next departure. Maria Gonzalez had been cleaning aircraft for Delta for 12 years. She'd found phones, tablets, jewelry, passports, dentures, you name it. People left everything in the oddest places, especially in first class where the seats were big enough to swallow small items. She was working through row 3, vacuuming under the seats, when she lifted the cushion on seat 3 to check for debris. That's when she saw it. Wedged deep between the seat cushions, where it must have slipped when the passenger was settling in or shifting around during the flight. A glint of diamonds catching the cabin light. Hey, I found something." Her supervisor came over, looked at what Maria was holding up. A diamond tennis bracelet, expensive looking, the kind of thing that would make anyone panic if they lost it. "Call the gate agent." Someone probably filed a lost item report. But before they could make the call, someone was already coming back onto the plane. Patricia Whitmore, who'd been standing at the gate still demanding that Amara be arrested, still insisting that her precious family heirloom had been stolen, was being escorted back by the gate agent. Behind her came Sharon Bennett and Jessica. Sharon had stayed at the gate, waiting to give her statement to airport police about the theft she'd reported. She'd been feeling vindicated, feeling like she'd done the right thing, caught a thief, protected a passenger's valuable property. But there was a small voice in the back of her mind, getting louder with each passing minute, asking uncomfortable questions. Questions about why she'd been so sure. Why she'd targeted Amara specifically. Why she'd been so resistant to other explanations. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Maria held up the bracelet. "Is this what you were looking for?" Patricia's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Relief. Confusion. And then something that might have been embarrassment trying to hide behind indignation. "That's impossible." Patricia grabbed the bracelet, examining it like it might be a fake. "I checked everywhere. I went through my seat, my purse, everything." Jessica, standing behind Sharon, spoke up quietly. "It must have slipped between the cushions when you were getting settled, Mrs. Whitmore. It happens more often than you'd think. Items fall into the seat tracks, between cushions into the pockets." Patricia turned the bracelet over in her hands, and slowly, very slowly, the reality of the situation was sinking in. She'd been so certain, so absolutely convinced that someone had stolen from her. She demanded that a teenage girl be arrested, prosecuted to the fullest extent. She'd stood there feeling righteous about it. And the bracelet had been in her own seat the entire time. "But I was sure it was in my purse," she said weakly. Sharon stood frozen. Her face had gone pale, all the blood draining out like someone had opened a valve. Because if the bracelet was here, wedged in Patricia's own seat, then that meant, oh God, That meant everything she'd done for the last 2 hours was based on nothing. The search, the accusation, the call to the captain, forcing Amara to sit in the galley like a prisoner, having her put in handcuffs and escorted off the plane. All of it. Every humiliating, devastating second of it. Based on nothing. Jessica was looking at Sharon now, and there was something in her expression that was worse than anger. Disappointment. Sadness. The look you give someone when they've confirmed your worst suspicions about them. Sharon, Jessica said quietly, that girl is probably still in handcuffs right now because of this. Sharon opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she say? What possible justification could she offer that wouldn't sound exactly like what it was? Bias. Prejudice. The assumption that a black teenager in first class must be up to something. The gate agent grabbed his radio. I need to contact security immediately. The missing item has been found on the aircraft. In the security office holding area, the radio call came through, and Officer Davis listened with an expression that started as relief and slowly transformed into something much more complicated. Relief that they hadn't actually arrested an innocent kid. Concern about the shitstorm this was about to become. And underneath it all, a quiet shame that he'd put handcuffs on a crying teenager based on an accusation without evidence. The bracelet has been found, he said to the room, in the owner's seat cushions. Amara Mitchell's face went through its own transformation. Vindication, fury, and a bone-deep exhaustion that comes from fighting a battle you shouldn't have had to fight in the first place. Take those handcuffs off my daughter. Right now. Supervisor Williams nodded to Officer Davis, who stepped forward with the key. The moment those cuffs clicked open, Amara pulled her arms forward, rubbing her wrists where the metal had left red marks. And then she collapsed into her mother's arms, all the fear and stress and humiliation of the last 2 hours pouring out in huge, gasping sobs. Amara held her daughter tight, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her back. She was whispering things only Amara could hear. I've got you, baby. Mama's here. You're safe. You're okay. I've got you. But over Amara's shoulder, Tamara's eyes were open and locked on the security officers. And the look in those eyes promised that this was far from over. You humiliated my child, Tamara said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning underneath. You put her in handcuffs. You paraded her through this airport like a criminal. You let hundreds of people record her in the worst moment of her life. Over nothing. Ma'am, we were responding to a report. A report with no evidence. Did any of you stop to question the accusation? Did any of you ask for actual proof before you decided to traumatize a child? Supervisor Williams at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. We followed standard protocol for theft accusations. Your protocol is broken if it allows this to happen. That's when Sharon Bennett appeared at the entrance to the holding area. She'd been escorted down by airport personnel to give her statement, and she walked in just in time to hear Tamara's words, just in time to see Amara sobbing in her mother's arms, just in time to see the aftermath of her own actions. Sharon stopped in the doorway, and for a moment, everyone just looked at her. The flight attendant who'd started this whole catastrophe. The woman who'd been so certain, so convinced, so willing to abuse her authority based on nothing but her assumptions. Sharon's voice came out barely above a whisper. I was just doing my job. The passenger reported the bracelet missing and You what? Tamara turned to face her fully, and Sharon actually took a step back from the intensity of her gaze. You decided my daughter looked like a thief? You decided that a teenage girl in first class must be up to something? You decided to search her belongings, question her, isolate her, and have her arrested without a single piece of evidence. The passenger said, I don't care what the passenger said. Your job is to serve passengers, not to racially profile children. Tamara's voice echoed off the walls. Do you understand what you've done? Do you have any idea what you've put her through? Sharon's face flushed red, a mixture of shame and defensiveness warring for dominance. It wasn't about. I was just responding to a theft report. Then why didn't you search everyone? Why didn't you check the area where the bracelet was last seen? Why did you go straight to my daughter, search her belongings, humiliate her in front of the entire cabin, and then have her arrested when you found nothing? Sharon had no answer. Because the truth was too ugly to say out loud. The truth was that she'd looked at Amara and made assumptions. The truth was that 20 years of stress and resentment and her own demons had found an outlet in a teenage girl who'd done nothing wrong. The truth was that she'd abused what little power she had because it made her feel in control of something. "I'm sorry," Sharon said weakly. "I was trying to do the right thing." The right thing? Amara's voice, raw from crying, spoke up from her mother's arms. "You made me sit in the galley like a criminal. You searched my stuff in front of everyone. You told the captain I was a thief. You had me put in handcuffs. And now you're sorry?" Sharon looked at this girl she'd traumatized, really looked at her for the first time. Saw her for who she actually was. 16 years old. Terrified. Innocent. Everything Sharon had refused to see when it would have mattered. "I didn't mean for—" "But you did," Tamara interrupted. "You did mean for this. Every choice you made, every action you took, you meant it. And now you get to live with that." Jessica had followed Sharon down to the security area, and now she stepped forward. "I tried to tell her," Jessica said to Tamara, her voice thick with guilt. "I should have done more. I should have spoken up louder. I should have stopped this before it got this far." Tamara looked at Jessica, and her expression softened slightly. "You're right. You should have. But at least you're acknowledging it now." Officer Davis cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mitchell, obviously your daughter is free to go. We'll be filing a report about the incident, and the airline will likely be conducting their own investigation." "Likely?" Tamara's voice was sharp again. "Not likely. Definitely. Because this isn't over. Not by a long shot." She turned to look at the crowd that had followed them to the security area, at all the phones still recording. "Everyone has been watching this. Everyone has seen what happened. And everyone is going to see what happens next. Because my daughter deserves justice. She deserves accountability. And she deserves to know that what happened to her today will never happen to another child on your airline." Sharon stood there, watching her career implode in real time. Watching the consequences of her actions catch up to her in the form of a mother's righteous fury and a teenage girl's tears. Watching the video recordings that would be uploaded and shared and viewed millions of times, cementing her as the villain in a story that would spark national conversations. But in that moment, none of that had happened yet. In that moment, Sharon just felt the weight of what she'd done settling onto her shoulders like concrete. Have you ever made a mistake so big that you couldn't take it back? Have you ever let your biases guide your actions and then had to face the consequences? Tell me in the comments, because this story is about to shift from private trauma to public reckoning. And if you want to see what happens when those videos go viral, when the media gets hold of this story, when Sharon faces professional and personal consequences, and when Amara finds her voice and fights back, you need to subscribe right now. Because the resolution to this story is going to be powerful, painful, and ultimately about justice served. In a security holding area in Atlanta's airport, two women faced each other across an unbridgeable divide. One who'd abused her power. One who'd suffered for it. And between them, a 16-year-old girl learning that sometimes the world is cruel and unfair, but sometimes, the truth wins. The bracelet had been found. The handcuffs had been removed. But the damage? That was just beginning to unfold. The silence in that security holding area was deafening. Sharon Bennett stood frozen, her mouth still open from her attempted apology, watching as Amara sobbed in her mother's arms. Officer Davis shifted his weight uncomfortably, the radio still crackling with updates about the found bracelet. And Supervisor Williams did what supervisors do when they realize a massive mistake has been made on their watch. She tried to control the damage. "Miss Mitchell," Williams said, her voice careful and measured. "On behalf of airport security, I want to apologize for what you've experienced today. We were responding to a reported theft, and clearly you handcuffed an innocent child," Tamara interrupted, still holding Amara tight. "Clearly you humiliated her in front of hundreds of people. Clearly your protocols failed spectacularly." "Yes, ma'am. And we will be reviewing our procedures to ensure." "I don't want to hear about reviews and procedures right now. I want to get my daughter out of here and away from all of you. But even as Tamara said it, she knew they couldn't just leave. Not yet. Because while they'd been in this holding area, while Amara had been crying and Sharon had been making excuses, something else had been happening. Something that would change everything. Those videos. All those phones that had been recording in the airport terminal, capturing Amara in handcuffs, capturing her terror and her mother's fury. They weren't just sitting on phones anymore. They were being uploaded. Posted to Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. And they were spreading like wildfire. Within 15 minutes of Amara being escorted through that terminal, the first video had been posted with the caption, "Black teenage girl arrested at Atlanta airport. This is heartbreaking." Within 30 minutes, it had 10,000 views. Within an hour, 100,000. And by the time Sharon was standing in that holding area realizing what she'd done, the videos had been viewed millions of times. The algorithm loves outrage. It loves injustice. It loves stories that make people feel something. And this story, a 16-year-old honor student falsely accused and publicly humiliated, was algorithmically perfect. But nobody in that holding area knew that yet. They were still in the immediate aftermath, still processing, still trying to figure out what came next. That's when he arrived. The airline supervisor. District Manager Thomas Crawford, a man who'd been having a pleasant afternoon in his office reviewing quarterly performance reports when his phone started exploding with notifications. Texts from gate agents. Calls from corporate. And a video, sent by a concerned employee, showing one of his flight attendants having a passenger arrested. Crawford walked into that holding area, took one look at the scene, Sharon pale and shaking, Amara crying in her mother's arms, security officers standing around like they wished they could disappear, and knew immediately that this was a career-defining moment. Not just for Sharon. For him too. What exactly happened here? His voice cut through the room with authority. Supervisor Williams started to explain, but Tamara interrupted. What happened is that your flight attendant decided my daughter looked like a thief, searched her belongings without cause, had her put in handcuffs and paraded through the airport, all over a bracelet that was in the owner's seat the entire time. Crawford's jaw tightened. He looked at Sharon. Is this true? Sharon opened her mouth, and you could see her trying to find words that would make this okay, that would justify her actions, that would shift blame anywhere but on herself. The passenger reported a theft. I was responding to. Did you have evidence that this young woman committed a theft? No, but. Did you search other passengers' belongings? No, Did you check the area where the item was last seen before accusing someone? Sharon's silence was answer enough. Crawford turned to Officer Davis. Was my employee the one who called for this arrest? Yes, sir. She reported a suspected theft and requested security meet the aircraft. Crawford looked at Sharon again, and something in his expression made her shrink back. Because this wasn't just disappointment. This was the look of someone calculating liability, public relations damage, legal exposure. This was the look of someone deciding who would be sacrificed to protect the company. Sharon, you're suspended. Effective immediately. Pending a full investigation into this incident. Mr. Crawford, I was just doing my job. Your job is to serve all passengers with respect and professionalism, not to racially profile children. He said it loudly enough that everyone in the holding area could hear. Loudly enough that the employees who'd followed him down would carry his words back to the crew room. Loudly enough to make it clear that the company was distancing itself from Sharon's actions. Sharon's face crumbled. The passenger said her bracelet was missing. I had to respond. You had to respond by immediately targeting a teenage girl? Jessica reported that you were suspicious of this passenger from the moment she boarded. Before anything went missing. Before any accusation was made. All eyes turned to Jessica, who'd been standing quietly near the back of the room, guilt written across her face. She stepped forward now, her voice soft but steady. It's true. Sharon questioned Amara's right to be in first class when she boarded. She was hovering near her seat, watching her. I noticed it because it made me uncomfortable. And when the bracelet was reported missing, Sharon went straight to Amara without considering any other possibilities. Sharon looked at Jessica with betrayal in her eyes. You're throwing me under the bus? I'm telling the truth. Something I should have done louder on that plane. Crawford pulled out his phone and made a call right there in the holding area. This is Crawford. I need you to pull all footage from Flight 447, Boston to Atlanta, from boarding through deplaning. Everything. And I need it within the hour. He hung up and looked at Tamara. Mrs. Mitchell, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for what your daughter has experienced. This is not who we are as an airline. This is not what we stand for. And yet it happened, Tamara said coldly. On your airline. By your employee. Following your protocols. You're absolutely right. And we will be conducting a full investigation. We'll review all our training procedures, our anti-discrimination policies, everything. And Mrs. Mitchell, the airline will cover any counseling your daughter needs to process this trauma. We'll also be compensating you for. I don't want your compensation. I want accountability. I want to make sure this never happens to another child. That's when Patricia Whitmore tried to quietly slip away. She'd been standing near the back of the holding area, holding her recovered bracelet, looking more uncomfortable with each passing minute. Because the reality of what her panic and accusations had triggered was becoming impossible to ignore. But Mrs. Chen, who'd insisted on following the situation to its conclusion, stepped directly into Patricia's path. For a woman in her 70s, she moved with surprising speed and determination. Where exactly do you think you're going? Mrs. Chen's voice was quiet but sharp as glass. Patricia stopped, clutching her bracelet. I have a connecting flight to catch. You have an apology to give. To that child whose life you nearly ruined with your carelessness. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was just panicked when I thought my bracelet was stolen. Panicked? You demanded that girl be prosecuted to the fullest extent. You wanted her arrested and charged. And now that you've found your precious bracelet in your own seat where it fell, you're just going to walk away? Patricia's face flushed red. She looked at Amara, still clinging to her mother, and for a moment, something like shame crossed her features. I'm sorry. I truly am. I was panicked and I wasn't thinking clearly. I should have checked more thoroughly before accusing anyone. It was a terrible apology. The bare minimum. The kind of apology someone gives when they're being watched and judged rather than when they're genuinely remorseful. But it was something. Amara didn't even look at her. Just stayed buried in her mother's arms, trying to make herself as small as possible. Mrs. Chen shook her head in disgust. You're sorry. How nice. That certainly undoes the handcuffs and the humiliation, doesn't it? Patricia fled then, rushing out of the holding area with her recovered bracelet and her fragile sense of superiority, leaving behind the wreckage of her assumptions. That's when Robert Caldwell stepped forward. The businessman from seat 3C who'd spent most of the flight on his laptop, who'd witnessed everything and said nothing, who'd chosen comfort over courage for 2 hours. But guilt, real crushing guilt, has a way of eventually forcing action. Mrs. Mitchell? His voice was professional but tinged with something that might have been regret. My name is Robert Caldwell. I'm an attorney specializing in civil rights cases. Tamara looked at him warily as he handed her his business card. And I was on that flight. I witnessed everything that happened. I saw how the flight attendant treated your daughter from the moment she boarded. I saw the accusation, the search, the lack of evidence, all of it. I recorded parts of it on my phone. Tamara's eyes narrowed. You recorded it and didn't speak up? Robert had the decency to look ashamed. Yes. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But what I can do now is offer to represent you and your daughter. Pro bono. Because what happened to Amara was discrimination, pure and simple. And it needs to be addressed not just by the airline, but publicly, legally, completely. Sharon, still standing off to the side, overheard this and went even paler. A civil rights attorney. Recordings. Witnesses. This wasn't just about losing her job anymore. This was about being the face of discrimination in a viral moment. This was about lawsuits and public condemnation and consequences that would follow her for years. Crawford stepped forward again. Mrs. Mitchell, as I said, will be conducting a full investigation. We'll cover any counseling your daughter needs. We'll work with you to... To what? Tamara's voice was ice. To make this go away quietly? To offer us a settlement in exchange for our silence? No. To make this right. Then here's what making it right looks like. A full public accounting of what happened. Policy changes that prevent this from ever happening again. Training for your staff on implicit bias and discrimination. And yes, Mr. Caldwell, I'll take your card. Because my daughter deserves justice and I'm going to make sure she gets it. Robert nodded. I'll call you tomorrow. We'll discuss next steps. Crawford made some notes on his phone, clearly already composing the PR strategy in his head. But Tamara wasn't done. And I want every single person who recorded my daughter in handcuffs today to see the resolution of this story. I want them to see that she was innocent, that she was humiliated for nothing, that your employee abused her power based on bias and prejudice. I want the whole truth out there, not just the sensational parts. We can issue a statement. You'll do more than issue a statement. You'll own this. Completely. The conversation continued, but Sharon wasn't really hearing it anymore. She drifted toward the exit, her uniform feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds, her mind spinning with the magnitude of what had just happened to her life. An hour later, Sharon sat alone in an airport hallway, still in uniform, her phone clutched in her hand. She'd been scrolling through social media, watching with growing horror as the videos spread. Her face was clearly visible in several of them. People were already identifying her, posting her name, finding her social media accounts. The comments were brutal. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Calling her racist. Calling for her to be fired. Calling for consequences. Some were threats. Some were just observations. But all of them were damning. Her phone rang. Her supervisor. Not Crawford, but her immediate supervisor James. The one who'd warned her this morning that one more complaint would mean reassignment. Sharon, don't come in tomorrow. HR will be in touch. You're suspended pending investigation, and honestly, given the video footage that's circulating, I'd be surprised if you still have a job by the end of the week. James, I was just trying to do the right thing. The right thing? Sharon, I warned you this morning about your attitude. I've been getting complaints about your behavior for months. And now this? Now we have viral videos of you racially profiling a child? There's no coming back from this. The line went dead. Sharon sat there in the hallway, and for the first time all day, really looked at herself. Not in a mirror, but internally. She thought about the moment she saw Amara board the plane. About her immediate suspicion. About how she'd questioned whether Amara belonged in first class. About how, when the bracelet went missing, her eyes had immediately gone to the black teenage girl instead of considering all possibilities. She thought about her morning, her fight with her ex-husband, her supervisor's warning, her resentment toward younger coworkers. And she realized that all of that stress, all of that anger, all of that feeling of powerlessness in her own life, she'd taken it out on a child who'd done nothing wrong. The recognition hit her like a physical blow. She found a bathroom, walked inside, and looked at herself in the mirror. Really looked. And she saw what she'd become. Bitter. Biased. Someone who used the small amount of power she had to hurt people instead of help them. This wasn't redemption. Sharon wasn't suddenly enlightened or transformed. But there was recognition. Recognition of consequences. Recognition that she'd destroyed a girl's day, traumatized her, humiliated her, all because Sharon had been carrying her own storms and had decided to rain on someone else. Her phone buzzed with notification after notification. Her social media accounts being tagged. Her face in video after video. The consequences were just beginning, and they would follow her for years. 2 weeks later, the story had continued to evolve. The videos had been viewed over 50 million times collectively. News outlets had picked it up. Civil rights organizations had gotten involved. And the airline had been forced to respond in ways that went far beyond a single employee suspension. In a modest home in Atlanta, Amara's grandmother's 80th birthday party was finally happening. It was smaller than planned, just family, because Amara wasn't ready for crowds yet. She'd spent the 2 weeks since the incident in counseling, processing the trauma, trying to reconcile the world she thought she lived in with the world she'd experienced. But today, surrounded by family who loved her, she picked up her violin. The same worn instrument her grandmother had given her years ago. And she played. Not perfectly, because her hands were still shaking slightly, but beautifully. Happy Birthday, arranged in a way that made several family members cry. Her grandmother, 80 years old and still sharp as ever, pulled Amara close after she finished. "How was your flight, baby? You never did tell me the whole story." Amara looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "It was complicated, Grandma. Really complicated. But Mama says we're going to make sure what happened to me never happens to another kid." Her grandmother smiled, the kind of smile that holds generations of wisdom. "That's my girl. Turn pain into purpose. Turn injustice into action." On the television in the background, a news report played. Following a viral video that sparked national outrage, the airline has announced comprehensive policy changes. All staff will undergo mandatory implicit bias training. New protocols require multiple levels of evidence before passengers can be searched or detained. And the airline has established a passenger rights hotline for reporting discrimination. The news anchor continued. Sharon Bennett, the flight attendant at the center of the controversy, was terminated from her position. She was spotted this week at an unemployment office, resume in hand, her 20-year career with the airline over. The camera showed brief footage of Sharon, no longer in uniform, looking older and more worn than she had 2 weeks ago. She wasn't speaking to media, wasn't defending herself, just quietly dealing with the consequences of her actions. She'd lost her job, her reputation, her financial stability. Whether she'd learned anything from it, whether she'd grown or changed, that remained to be seen. But the consequences were real and permanent. The scene shifted to an office building. Amara Mitchell and Robert Caldwell sitting across from airline executives, reviewing documents. A settlement was being reached. Not just money, though there was that, but commitments to change, oversight, accountability. Tamara's voice carried through the news footage. "This isn't just about what happened to my daughter. This is about every person who's been profiled, discriminated against, treated as less than based on nothing but appearance and assumption. If Amara's story can prevent even one other child from experiencing what she did, then something good has come from this nightmare." Back at Ashford Academy, Amara stood at a podium in front of the entire student body. She was nervous, her hands gripping the sides of the podium, but her voice was steady. "2 weeks ago, I learned that being polite and obedient and twice as good doesn't always protect you from discrimination. I learned that bias exists even in places and from people you'd never expect. But I also learned that speaking up matters. That standing up for yourself matters. That your voice, even when it's shaking, even when you're scared, matters." The students applauded, and Amara saw her friends in the crowd, saw their support, saw that she wasn't alone. She'd become something she never wanted to be, the center of a viral moment, a symbol of injustice. But she was choosing to use that platform, to turn that visibility into something meaningful. A letter arrived at Amara's dorm later that day. From Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who'd sat beside her on that flight and been the only passenger to speak up loudly in her defense. "Dear Amara," it read, "I've been thinking about you every day since that terrible flight. I want you to know how proud I am of how you've handled this situation with grace and strength. I taught for 40 years, and I saw countless students face injustice. The ones who survived and thrived were the ones who refused to let the cruelty of others define them. You are one of those students. Keep playing your violin. Keep studying. Keep being exactly who you are. The world needs more people like you, not fewer. With love and admiration, Helen Chin." Amara kept that letter in her violin case, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are people who see your humanity, who stand up, who refuse to be silent. The story ended not with a neat bow, not with everyone learning their lesson and growing, but with reality. Sharon had lost her career and was dealing with the consequences of her actions, but whether she truly understood the harm she'd caused remained questionable. Patricia Whitmore had apologized but probably went back to her life without much reflection. Robert Caldwell had offered his legal services but still had to live with the knowledge that he'd watched injustice unfold and initially done nothing. But Amara? Amara was changed too, but in a different way. She was hurt, traumatized, forced to confront ugly truths about the world earlier than she should have had to. But she was also stronger, more determined, more aware of the power of speaking up, of refusing to accept injustice quietly. The final image was Amara's face. Not crying, not broken, but determined. Changed, absolutely. But not defeated. Never defeated. The text on screen read, "In the face of injustice, speaking up isn't just brave. It's necessary." Amara's story sparked policy changes that will protect thousands of passengers. Her voice, amplified by witnesses and recordings, created accountability where there might have been none. The question isn't whether you'll face injustice in your life. The question is what you'll do about it. In airports across the country, new signs appeared in crew areas. See something, say something. Bias has no place here. Mandatory training sessions began. Policies were rewritten. Not everywhere, not perfectly, but in some places because of one teenage girl's nightmare and her refusal to let it be for nothing. Amara went back to her studies. Back to her violin. Back to her dreams of college and music and a future that looked different than she'd imagined 2 weeks ago, but was still bright. Still possible. Still hers. And every time she played her violin, every time she sat in class, every time she boarded a plane, she carried with her the knowledge that she had survived. That she had spoken up. That her story had mattered. Have you ever had to find your voice in the face of injustice? Have you ever had to choose between staying silent and speaking up? Tell me in the comments, because these choices define us. These moments shape who we become. And if you believe that standing up for what's right matters, if you believe that accountability and justice are worth fighting for, if you believe that Amara's story and others like it need to be heard, then hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Because injustice thrives in silence. But when we speak up, when we support each other, when we refuse to accept discrimination as normal, we change the world. One voice at a time. One story at a time. One stand at a time. Amara Mitchell boarded a plane as an excited teenager and deplaned as a survivor, an advocate, and a reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's speaking up despite it. Her story doesn't end here. None of our stories do. They continue in the choices we make, the stands we take, the times we choose justice over comfort. What will your story be?